And Jeff Patterson today emphasized, he had a couple of triplets, but the one I want to bring up now is secrecy and deception, cover-up, minimization. Secrecy, cover-up, minimization. When authorities are dealing with nuclear incidents. I think that that is what gets us to this point, that nuclear power, weapons and energy, both, threatens us fundamentally as biological and social beings. And going back to the title that David Kraft gave me, People, Where Are the People? Let's not forget that democracy has a root, the Greek word demos, which means the people. Nuclear power is incompatible with we the people, with any genuine notion of democracy. So before I explore some of these issues further, I want to dispose of one common question quickly. I found many people saying to me after Fukushima, in Japan of all places, they've already suffered once. How could it possibly happen there? Well, as in other places, it's not that special in that sense. It's just that there was a little extra labor that had to go in. One is in a neutral way, the scientific experiment, imperative that they're Japanese scientists, physicists, indeed even very progressive physicists, liberals and leftists, who had known about nuclear experimentation that surged before the war and who were eager to resume it after the war. That desire to know. So oftentimes we are somehow made to think that scientists are very special people, and if they want to know something, if they want to find something else out, they uniquely are entitled to having that desire, knowledge, and etc. Why? That's one thing, scientific imperative. The other one, of course, is something that's come up a lot today, atoms for peace. And we all know how nuclear war was conceptually normalized under President Eisenhower through that program. But for Japan, there was even a reasoning amongst American officials that because of Hiroshima, therefore, nuclear technology was owed by these people. That it was indeed a Christian task to impart this technology to Japanese. And that Japanese people, on the other hand, on the receiving end, had to be gotten over what was patronizingly called by Japanese who were eager to promote this technology, had to be gotten over their nuclear allergy. And gotten over it, they were. There was all the talk of bringing wealth, too cheap to meter, wealth to depopulating communities, so forth and so on. The same dreary and dreadful pattern of seduction happened in Japan too. And another one that I think is very important, a number of you might have seen an op-ed in the New York Times with Frank von Hippel, whose name came up today, and a Japanese writer, a few days ago called Japan's Nuclear Mistake, in which the authors say it's not good for proliferation reasons for Japan to continue to rely on nuclear power, but quickly dismiss the possibility that Japan would veer from its anti-nuclear weapons policy. But it is clear to many people, experts who study this, that the attraction of nuclear power, nuclear energy in Japan, as elsewhere, has been that it could be a latent nuclear weapons power. And in fact, the former lamentable, but not lamented, governor of Tokyo, who's now left that position to run for national political office, startup in the group, just said, because he was aligned with an almost equally unpleasant person, New Power broker Hashimoto from Osaka, that he had made a big thing about distancing himself from nuclear power, and former Governor Ishihara just said, I'm going to make them take that out of the party statement, party platform, because we Japanese cannot afford to give up on the possibility of nuclear weapons power. So people shouldn't be sanguine about Japan and its nuclear weapons ambitions. Also, just one other thing, people have often said to me, Japanese people don't protest, and we've seen over the summer that that's not true. But it was also true a long, long time ago. And for example, in 1950, with the Stockholm Appeal, some of you may know about this, right? there were 273.5 million signatories worldwide, 6.4 million in Japan, and 3 million in the US. Those who became involved in signing this appeal to ban nuclear weapons think of this as a crime against humanity, were quickly red purged under the occupation. In March 1954 was the Lucky Dragon incident, and housewives in one ward in Tokyo launched an anti-nuclear campaign and gathered 32 million signatures. 1954 is well before social media. So another thing, maybe there is something to be said about face-to-face contact and bringing your clipboard and talking to individuals. I mean, it's really an extraordinary number, which the current movement has not been able to achieve, and that they were trying to get 10 million signatures by April, was it? Now it's just been extended, and I think it's at 70 or 80, 10 million, and it's now at 6 million or so. Okay, back to secrecy. The United States occupation, well, the United States having dropped the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then proceeds to have pretty much a unilateral rather than allied occupation of Japan, which was turned out to be absolutely significant for the future that post-war Japan would have. But the occupation forbade any dissemination of information or images of the atomic bombs. Right? So people were not, they could not talk about, they couldn't publish anything on it. There's a great deal of censorship that went on under the occupation that was all about bringing American liberal values to this until ever so recently enemy fascist country, but so be it. I remember those years well, and this is in a way how I come to be before you today, was that my father was part of the U.S. occupation. My mother was a woman, Japanese woman, he met and married in that context, fought a lot at the breakfast table about U.S. atmospheric testing. My father said it was absolutely necessary because of those commies. And my mother, who was an Anne Stevenson scholar, was absolutely horrified. And since I knew then already that my mother was right and my father inevitably and necessarily wrong, I kind of was set on the right path on the nuclear issue very early on. And I want to share with you a poem that is in your packets, but it's the place I often return to think about the nuclear issue. It was a poem written just about that time, right at the end of the occupation, on the first images of the atomic bomb, of the victims, in other words, people on ground zero. Remember the Smithsonian, 17 years ago now, would not allow an exhibit which showed the experience of the atomic bombs on the ground. So they ended up with a refurbished Enola Gay. Now, what a complete way to learn about the impact of the atomic bombs, is just to have the Enola Gay there. So this poet, a woman, this was a very, very heady time in Japan when so much that had been crushed during the war years and then even under the occupation was coming to light. So in the context of the union movement, marking of the anniversary of Hiroshima, she showed up at work and was told to produce a poem. So this is her poem, having just seen her first image of an atomic bomb victim. Upon seeing a photograph of an atomic bomb victim, this burnt, oozing face of August 5th, 6th, 1945, belonged to someone in Hiroshima at that moment. One of the 250,000 burnt, oozing things no longer of this world. Even so, my friend, let us look once again into the faces we have turned toward each other. Faces without a trace of the flames of war. Faces of today, radiant with health. Morning fresh faces. When I search there for the expression tomorrow could bring, a shudder passes through me. The earth holds several hundred nuclear weapons. How when you walk the abyss between life and death, can you be so serenely beautiful? Hush and listen. Can you hear something coming? What needs to be seen is before your eyes. What needs to be chosen is in the palm of your hand. 8:15 a.m. comes around every day. That morning of August 6, 1945, all those 250,000 people who died instantly were, like you, like me, serenely beautiful, caught off guard. So the title of the poem actually is Greetings. Greetings to each other, greetings to this face of a once beautiful young woman, so transfigured. For many years, when I read this poem, I was transfixed by this posing of a moment. Focus on the sharp divide between before and after, right? Robert Chavez gave a very powerful talk to us today about turning on the tap, getting drops of fresh water, breathing in fresh, filling your lungs with fresh air. So I've long read this poem as that, and especially after Fukushima too. The moment before that, you can just turn on the water in your kitchen, and you can drink it, quench your thirst as much as you want, and breathe deeply, fill your lungs. And the moment after, you can't do that. So I've been caught on that moment, and think about, the moment before crisis when life is forever transformed, and ask myself, what precipice are we sitting on the edge of now? And I don't mean the physical cliff, of course, but with this mountain of waste. But in thinking about this conference, I've begun to think more and more about how that divide might not be so sharp, and how the moment of being off guard can extend for months, years, decades, including after as well as before crisis. And in the first place, the crisis itself may be invisible like radiation, as long as there isn't a bombing, like Hiroshima, Nagasaki, or the atmospheric test, or a quote-unquote accident, as 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, or Fukushima. So I've come to think that there are many kinds of being off guard, some of which are, for example, the condition of living with a nuclear power or reprocessing plant, in the case of Japan or elsewhere, believing the safety myth, and then keeping secret to yourself worries. We have a handy psychological word for that, denial, right? Denial gets this boost. It is true. And I'm thinking that when Jeff gave us secrecy this morning as one of the prime characteristics of the nuclear industrial complex, we also need to think about secrecy not only on the part of the government or the corporation, of local people who promote it, but the secrecy on the part of those of us who become subjected to it. Of alienation from one's own anxieties, the effort it takes to keep on denying something you suspect. It is also something I think that Robert Chavez's talk got at, that so often we are asked to choose between life and livelihood. Again, we're not all opposed to that choice equally. That's where there's a great deal of social injustice. It's a terrible, terrible balance, and there should be no need in the 21st century for anyone to have to choose their lives over their livelihood. And yet that's a question that's constantly being posed. Another kind of being off guard is that after the disaster, simply getting used to living with those conditions. Akiko Yoshida today talked about, in response to a question, saying there are 2 kinds of people left in Fukushima. Those who would like to leave but can't because of reasons of their work or really financial constraints or possibly family reasons. And those who prefer to believe in the government. And I'm thinking that even on the part of the former, that those who choose to believe that what the government is saying, that they're in safe enough places, that they themselves must have suspicions, right? And that they are alienated from their own victimization. So there's that kind of being off guard, is simply getting used to things. And this is a hard one. I'm thinking that some forms of support even for victims might be a version of being caught off guard. I'll try to elaborate on that